Out killing time, waiting to go see the foot doctor.
Has to come within striking distance of Donald Trump. He has to show the American people that he has what it takes to overcome the polls, if you will, with regard to Trump. But, I remember the Dewey Truman race. Now, I wasn't around then, so, all right, guys, but I remember reading about the Dewey Truman race and the headlines in all the New York papers around the country. Dewey wins. Dewey's the president. Truman won. So we can't necessarily rely on polls. With regard to DeSantis, well, let's see what happens tonight.
On that note, actually, Bart, when it comes to Iowa, a lot of this comes down to organization, campaigning on the ground. Now, versus, TV ads in other states. So what is the significance of Iowa being the first state, at least for the Republicans this year, versus, say, if it was Florida? How does that change how these candidates campaign?
I think it was Iris that mentioned that, no, it was Arlene mentioned that DeSantis has been to all 99 counties. Ramaswamy has been to all 99 counties at least twice. That's the traditional way to campaign in Iowa. Iowans take their first in the nation status very seriously, as do the people of New Hampshire. You could go into a mini mart in Des Moines and pick the woman behind the desk and put her in this seat, and she could talk like a political pundit. That's how they are there. They are serious about it. And they expect their candidates to come and talk to them personally. And so that usually that makes a difference. Donald Trump, of course, breaks all the rules. He shows up and he makes a rally, and they come from 99 counties to him to listen to him. But organization matters, especially when it's cold. They will go out. They'll vote when it's cold, but somebody needs to be on the phone to say, hey, you're not here yet. I know you're planning to come. Are you coming? The door's closed in 10 minutes.
On that note, Trump this year has had all his legal issues, so he's been...
Narratives, no matter what your political perspective is.
It was a photo of a young black man dressed in a suit, and he was sitting in a barber's chair here in Atlanta. And the caption under the photo read, Reverend B.J. Johnson, member of Dr. Martin Luther King's Southern Christian Leadership Conference, sits in a barber chair. And then the next line was this, police warned him he was trespassing. Reverend Johnson was trespassing, the article explained, because that barbershop had a policy of only serving Atlanta's white residents. That day, though, Dr. King and his organization decided that that was wrong, and they were going to do something about it. Now, this was November 1965. Reverend King and his allies had just gotten the Civil Rights Act passed. The year before, they got the Voting Rights Act passed, signed into law by the president only a few months earlier. But on that day, they were at this local barbershop here in Atlanta, calling attention to blatant and immoral discrimination that still existed, even here in Dr. King's city. And it was wrong, and they were going to do something about it. Simple act of sitting in a chair, waiting to get your hair cut, and facing arrest for doing so. It was nonviolent direct action that was meant to reach people's hearts, to wake them up to this sort of insane injustice. When the police told Reverend Johnson that he was trespassing and he'd need to leave the barbershop immediately or be taken to jail, he told the police that he was going home to go get his jail clothes. He said, we're coming back and staying until this thing is over. Now, I was literally just being born when this was happening, so I admit I don't remember the specific event. But that sort of determined righteous action, that was the world that I was being brought into, a world being shaped every day by the unbending moral clarity of Dr. King and his allies. It's what my parents taught me living up in New York City. In the late 1960s, they had success as a comedy team, Stiller and Mira, and much of their act was based on their mixed marriage. My mom was Irish Catholic, my dad was Jewish, and at a time when mixed marriages of any kind were challenging. They were liberal and progressive. They went to civil rights marches. But we weren't living in the South. and I wasn't experiencing the day-to-day injustices that still existed all over the country. Being a Jewish kid in New York, I never even really experienced anti-Semitism. In a lot of ways, I grew up aware but unaware of the struggle that was still going on. But what I did know, and I knew it in my bones, even as a kid growing up, was that this place right here, this church, it stood for righteousness, for fearless sacrifice in pursuit of dignity and equality. It was Reverend Johnson sitting in that barber chair and only leaving so he could go get his jail clothes. It was Dr. King organizing powerful, nonviolent protests and marching for peace. It was civil rights leaders and ministers and activists fearlessly marching together. And then, every so often, I'd see a couple of rabbis marching too. And honestly, they were pretty hard to miss. It would be like Dr. King marching, and then there'd be this rabbi carrying this big Torah marching alongside him. And as a Jewish kid growing up, I remember feeling this sense of pride, seeing rabbis standing in solidarity with Dr. King and others who were fighting for civil rights. And we weren't a religious family growing up. We did Christmas and Hanukkah, or as my sister and I called it, presents. Later, my dad would go on to invent Festivus on Seinfeld. But this sense of doing the right thing and supporting those of another faith, bonded in mutual respect, struck a chord that went beyond Hot Wheels and video games. And I remember that idea sort of blowing my mind, the idea that we could have different belief systems and still find common ground. I learned recently that the person who spoke right before Dr. King at the March on Washington in 1963, the man whose speech led directly into Dr. King's, was a rabbi from New Jersey named Joachim Prinz. He and Dr. King met in 1958. Rabbi Prinz had been expelled from Nazi Germany as Hitler was rising to power there, and he fled to America, and he immediately became a fierce supporter and ally of the civil rights struggle underway here. Dr. King once told a group of Jewish leaders, "My people were brought to America in chains. Your people were driven here to escape the chains fashioned for them in Europe. Our unity is born of our common struggle for centuries." Unity born of our common struggle. I mentioned that the rabbi gave a speech right before Dr. King came to the podium at the Lincoln Memorial that day. That's sort of like being the opening act for the Beatles at Shea Stadium. But I looked it up, and he did say something that really resonated with me. He said, "America has become a nation of silent onlookers, silent in the face of hate, in the face of brutality. America must not remain silent. Not merely Black America, but all of America. It must speak up and act." Rabbi Prinz was echoing the message of Dr. King, who said that a man dies when he refuses to stand up for that which is right, when he refuses to stand up for justice. It was Dr. King and Rabbi Prinz joined in unity, allies for each other's communities, Baptist minister and a Jewish rabbi fighting in solidarity with one another. Now, for me, as a wannabe Baptist minister, I will admit I want to be Senator Pastor Raphael Warnock when I grow up.
Or not.
On this day, standing here in this esteemed pulpit, with everything going on in the world at this moment, it seems to me like that's a pretty good example for us to try to follow, to be allies for each other, to call out hate of all kinds, and to call out those who peddle in that hate as well, those who demonize people based on their political, cultural, or ethnic identity. It feels like something has been unleashed in this country over the last few years. The racism and anti-Semitism and hatred that's always been with us, but that's been given license to come out from the shadows again. And it's this rising tide of intolerance and prejudice that just seems to be everywhere now. This bigotry that's rooted in ignorance and fear. And it feels to me like we're living in a moment where we need the inspiration and moral clarity of Dr. Martin Luther King more than ever. His message to not be silent, to stand up for that which is right. Dr. King at one point traveled up to New Jersey to speak at Rabbi Prinz's synagogue, and he told the congregation there, We are dependent on each other. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. The example set by Reverend King and his opening act, Rabbi Prince, all those years ago, it's worth remembering, I think, especially in times like these.
It's definitely got a screw loose. Definitely.
Yes, in reality, but that's good because our people are with it, so maybe it's actually.
A spokesperson Trump campaign says it cancel all of this weekend of the West. I mean, that just because I mean, you could see right there in that last shot, emissions in some air. Nothing like what we're expecting here, luckily, but we are expecting some.
It's a nice day today. I saw 6 scooters over there one day. 6 of those bird scooters. They're right back up in here where these rocks are. Somebody threw them over the top. Thought that was funny.
Donald Trump. I'm supporting him because he was a good president back in 2016, and I know that's the president that we need today.
Vivek Ramaswamy, I think, good talker, yeah, but the way he kind of is calling out, like everyone in Washington, for not really caring the common citizen cares about. That's kind of one thing that I kind of liked about him.
Nikki Haley, absolutely. I'm tired of all the backbiting and all of that goes along with DeSantis and Trump and Biden and that whole group, and we're ready for a new start.
Haley, absolutely. She's the strongest, most intelligent, level-headed person out there for us to have as our next leader of this free world.
Actually, I'm trying to decide. It's between Governor DeSantis and Governor Haley. I've been on the DeSantis team, but I've been really impressed in the last couple of weeks with her passion and her intelligence and her people skills and the way I believe she's a really, really good leader.
So the music is getting louder and louder here if Trump indeed wins tonight. He's going to give a speech right here at his campaign headquarters in Des Moines, Iowa, to, of course, announce his victory. We're waiting for him to come here. He's right now visiting.
You write in your direct messages on any single app, whether on your phone or on your computer, is tracked, recorded, and can be used and is often used against people in court of law. And why is that? It's because you no longer have privacy in your personal communications when you're using these technologies. And the reality world is, frankly, technology, the fundamental way, one of the main ways in which we communicate with each other. In other words, all communications to an extent are being tracked and recorded and being used potentially in criminal prosecutions if you're accused of a relevant crime. There's also geolocation tracking, meaning your phone tracks your location, your car tracks your location in some regards, and especially if you're using a navigation app where, of course, you're monitoring different traffic patterns and so on. Everywhere you go, every single thing you do, that is all being monitored. Now, many people may not know this, crimes, for example. If you were to get into one of the police computers they have in the police cars, and nothing against the police, of course, but this is getting into the extent to which government has begun getting its hands on different forms of private information that used to be forbidden from them obtaining. But because of public-private partnerships where private companies are recording this data, tracking this data, police, law enforcement, FBI, CIA, or whatever else can even companies for even that, can request this data or even purchase this data, and it can be used against you, in many cases is. Now, if you're on these police tracking systems, you'll type in a person's name, you'll find not only the individual, you'll find also their pseudonyms, the names they use on different parts of the internet.
You'll find their email addresses, including all the different ones tracked and connected. You'll find, for example, all of their phone tracking data everywhere they went, because they very likely have a phone in their pocket while they're walking around. And even if you turn your phone off, that tracking technology is still activated. There's also bank tracking. Now, like what happened, for example, to many January 6th defendants, many of them were reported by credit card companies. Every single person who had a credit card with them and used their credit card on that day was tracked and reported to authorities by their banks. There's also modern smart car tracking. Let's imagine, for example, that you don't have a smartphone, you don't use these different apps to navigate, you want to be free from that, but you drive a new car. And guess what? Almost every single new car has this technology built in with its GPS system. And of course, the next generation of vehicles, as we've been discussing, will have things not only to track that, but to track, of course, the local laws on speed limits, the local laws, for example, on, let's say, the form of lanes and roads and so on, because how they're going to be driving erratically unless they know the structure of the roads themselves. All of that will be recorded. And of course, they already have the technology in place to record that. Of course, again, necessary technology as well if they want to start policing it or install these kill switches in your car to make it so you can't drive at all. There's also app tracking on your various phone data and your phone activity. If you download an app on your smartphone, have a look at the terms of service agreement, because you might notice you're giving them access to things such as your microphone, meaning every single thing you do, oftentimes, even including when your phone is in your pocket, you're not currently using it, can be recorded. If you give it access to your video, same exact thing. They're able to record that data and use it for their own purposes. If you give them access to your contacts, all your contacts now become also the pseudo property of that company. You've handed it over. Same thing with your videos and your photos. All of that will be then tracked and recorded and become the property, or at least granted access to, another company which can then sell the data. Of course, pay attention to exactly what rights you're giving them for that content. But this is the way the modern system works. Now, look, the big issue with all of this is that, I think we've, to an extent, sacrificed our basic freedoms. And as we sacrificed our basic freedoms for, sometimes convenience, or because, our friends are using an app that we all have to use, we've adopted these things without paying attention to the way that government has begun regulating it. And as government has begun regulating it, while they begun getting access to it, they begun creating laws that allow them to, of course, monitor it, to regulate it, to use it. And as these things have expanded over time, there become loopholes. And these loopholes have allowed a public-private partnership that has allowed government, law enforcement, federal agencies, and many other things to track this data, obtain this data, use this data, and prosecute you with this data in ways that the Constitution would otherwise protect us against. And we see it already being used against things, for example, like, counterterrorism laws, where even patriots are being labeled, using terrorist labels now. We see it already being used in criminal prosecutions, where people's political viewpoints are being used against them, including, for example, if you happen to support the former president, Donald J. Trump, that is being used against people in the court of law, especially as it relates to J6. And we're also seeing it being used when it comes to this basic internet censorship. Now look, this is not to mention the various forms of tracking and surveillance that are on the horizon, the things still being proposed. We've talked before about centralized banking digital currencies, CBDCs. In other words, digital dollars, digital currency, cryptocurrency, which regulations are now removing the crypto part, meaning it can and will be tracked. Now, this, in reality, while we talk about it in some regards that, hey, it's going to track all of your activity. If you buy a product, the government can monitor what you're purchasing and, of course, regulate it. In China, the Chinese Communist Party already does this. And you may be forbidden from buying certain products like bus tickets. They have dating apps that are only available for people of higher tiers. Of course, because it's tied to your social credit score, meaning your good citizen score. Your score falls too low, they start making it so that you're limited on what you can purchase. You're limited on the access you have to the the freedom other people enjoy, relative freedom. Freedom with strings attached they have in that society. It actually goes beyond that. A CBDC also creates a type of global citizenship tracking because every single person will have to have an account. If you want to buy something, you have to have an account. If you're going to get, welfare, you have to have an account. If you're going to, for example, buy food, you need to have an account. In other words, everyone has to have one. And if you're then assigned that, what does that also mean? It means you have to have a digital device that allows you to use it, meaning you have to have a smartphone, maybe a chip in your hand like they're proposing now, or maybe a brain chip like Elon Musk is suggesting. You'll have to have a system through which to access it. And when you have that system, you're also tying yourself into every other form of surveillance, monitoring, tracking that we've talked about before. That includes video, audio, text, and also geolocation.
Living in a glass house.
Of course, purchases you're making, meaning your financial activities. And the problem they're having with enacting laws on CBDCs, centralized banking digital currencies, is they only really work if every country in the world adopts them. Now look, when it comes to the illegal aliens now flooding into the United States from all corners of the world, and the various programs now being offered to them, these things often double as a way to keep tabs on them. Take, for example, free health care. Now look, and I know it's controversial that many different states are giving free health care to illegal aliens. California is doing it, and people are saying, why are you doing this when we can't even make our budget? We have a massive deficit and you want to give free health care. The reason they do that, at least in my opinion, is this. These individuals already get free health care. If you're homeless, if you're an illegal alien, if you're not on the books, and you show up at the door of an American hospital, they cannot legally turn you away. It's against the law. They have to provide treatment. Now, that treatment is usually done on the grounds that you can actually pay it back. But in the event that you cannot pay it back, you don't have a home address, you don't exist on the books within the country, they have no way of tracking you or holding you financially accountable to the debts you have incurred. Then that fee has to go on to the federal government, which then reimburses it. And they found a way around this where they don't just make them pay it, because that's a limited fund and hospitals going out of business because they're running out of money. Government isn't giving it to them anymore. That then goes to the taxpayers when they give it in terms of the Obamacare system. It goes into the premiums of people who are trying to buy health care for their families because we're forced to do so by government regulation. In other words, they found a way to defer that cost onto individual taxpayers.
Yep.
And as that system has taken place, what has happened? They've enacted a tracking system for illegal aliens. Now, remember, they're also giving them smartphones when they enter the country. Why are they doing that? It's a tracking system. And as you get more people here and more needed technologies and more system to support, you're going to have increasing systems to track, to monitor, to surveil individuals who are technically not on the books, and so they have to create new books and new ways of which to track these people. And as this whole system rolls out, this is laying the grounds for something George Orwell couldn't imagine. When George Orwell wrote his book, 1984, the sci-fi kind of dystopian picture of what the world might look like, he was thinking of telescreens. Your TV is watching you. How far beyond that have we gone already? Now, we're in a system, in this world right now, where almost everything is becoming digitized. And as government moves into the digital space, it means that everything will also be governed. And of course, this is representing a new type of totalitarianism that I think reflects what Klaus Schwab is saying. You won't have any privacy anymore, and your personality is going to have to change to reflect that. A future, for example, that I personally don't want to see happen. And I hope they do create some regulations to prevent that from taking place. Of course, a lot of it is already in place, and I think this needs to be clarified in terms of where the barriers are within the boundaries of our own constitutional protections. All right.
What they want to do for this country to the American. And what we're seeing in Iowa right now is the voters in Iowa, the Republicans that want to nominate the right guy, looks like they're siding with Trump. It wasn't enough. So, look, I think anyone challenging Trump right now is going to have a hard time. The voters feel like he was short. They want to give him another shot. But I also think that he's the right guy for the right moment.
Fascinating take. And we do want to mention that right now there are many networks out there that have called this race for former President Trump. We can see the data is rolling in. It's still, 3.8% of